Well, I have been in my career where, as an investor, where I put too many eggs in one basket, right? So the diversification of not just property type, but market, cash flow appreciation, all the things that you mentioned, I think is that well-rounded, diverse portfolio, and that balance is really where you get the highest success rate of anybody if you're focused on real estate.
I am Christina Suter, and this is the Real Estate Breakthrough Show, where we talk about the reality of real estate, the mindset you need in order to face the reality of what it is, and tips and tricks to get you moving forward in investing. I am your host, Christina Suter.
Turn times are suffering across the industry. So what might normally take 2-3 weeks to close a loan is taking 3 months in some cases. So if there was any nugget or piece that I would give about the climate related to lending for investors, it would be that. But that I can't think of anything else.
No, that's lovely. And I went ahead and turned on the recorder, so we actually had that on. So welcome to Real Estate Freedom Breakthrough. I am Christina Suter, your host, and I have Caeli Ridge with me, who is a personal friend of mine. At least I consider her a personal friend. I love her integrity. I love her company. I love where she comes from. I got the chance to co-present with her one time. And ever since then, I'm like looking down going, who is this chick down there? I'm like, I gotta talk to her. Like, you know, and I hope my listeners get a chance to really understand and appreciate you the way that I understand and appreciate you, because it really, like, you have such a depth of experience in your field. So I haven't even read your background yet, your bio real quick, so I'm going to read it because it's nice and short. And then you can fill us in on what isn't in there, the juicy bit. So Caeli Ridge is the president of the and CEO of Ridge Lending Group and is herself a real estate investor. She has been an established real estate investor for over 20 years, holding as many as 42 investment properties across the United States at one time. Caeli has worked with tens of thousands of real estate investors and homeowners all over the country, helping more families realize their dreams of ownership as real estate investors than any other mortgage lender in the country. When she is not running Ridge Lending Group, or RLG, Caeli is a sought-after speaker, and that is how I met her, and can be found providing insight and education to investors at events across the country. Located in Portland, Oregon, and yes, Caeli does fly from Portland to Los Angeles to present. I'm aware of that. Caeli is also a wife, mother of 2, and a devoted friend of many. So Caeli, it is always, always, always good to see you.
What a lovely intro. I'm going to have to, I need that. Can I borrow that? I'm going to use that for all of
I read your bio.
You know what? Someone must have I love it. It's perfect. Thank you for that. That was fantastic.
I'm glad.
Please. It's so good to see you. Thank you, Christina, for having me. I think that of all of the speaking engagements and the travel that I do, I really do appreciate your platform very, very much, because I think that we're so aligned in the education piece and the abundance of education that's just not readily available out there for people, right? Google is our friend. We love Google, but there's the intensiveness and the learning curve of real estate investing is huge. And there's, without the real life experience and knowledge of the people that have been there, done that, fallen on their faces and gotten up and reinvented and things, you just don't know what you don't know. And then add on the lending, which is what, I'll share some of those details with your listeners today, exponentially increases that learning curve. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much. Okay, so filling in the blanks, let me just share with
exactly.
listeners. So Ridge Lending Group, I think you're aware of this. We're a second generation company that we really focus in on that individual investor from a residential real estate perspective. While we have funding opportunities for commercial, short-term bridge loans, some non-QM products, portfolio loans, we really kind of, I would say, primarily address the single family to 4 unit from a conventional Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac perspective. We're licensed nationwide, so we have a nice broad footprint. As you mentioned, I've been doing this for over 20 years, but I think that a real value add is that education piece. So much to know, so much to learn. When I'm on the phone talking to clients on a daily basis, it's quickly established that it really is the financing that people sort of struggle with the most. It's like learning a new language, right? But because the leverage...
Including me. I mean, I understand financing. I've done a lot of it, but just the process of getting financing as an entrepreneur can be incredibly complicated. So sorry to throw that into your hat, but you can touch on that. So keep going.
It's so true. And for that reason, because it is so detailed, so complicated, and because it gives the leverage and the use of other people's money is really what's going to give us that greatest rate of return on our investment. It's crucial for the individual to have some armor, right? A few definitions of what's going on the underwriting side of all of this, right? You've got your financing, you've got your qualifications, but what is the underwriter looking for? What are those guidelines that we have to adhere to in this box or the next or the next? So understanding those definitions, how it relates to the individual, and then their goals this year and next and in 10 years, and really learning how to optimize, right? How to take your debt to income ratio and make sure that as you evolve as an investor, that we are maximizing, right? We're optimizing that number because your qualifications, debt to income, credit, assets, those are not static things. As we continue to amass properties and buy and sell and refi, all of those things, we need to be cognizant that the qualifications are fluid. So understanding how to keep them at their best is only going to support the highest and best use benefit for the goal. So if there's one thing I would say, it's probably that, the education, and that we're not a one size fits all. I kind of alluded to the fact that we have a pretty diverse product line, loan programs for investors that don't just start and stop with the conventional, pretty diverse there.
Do list them, because I started, we jumped in kind of midstream. So do list, and that's important because people who are listening to this show are going to be sometimes looking for conventional, because sometimes I'm looking for conventional on a single family residence, whether it's my primary residence or a secondary home, or sometimes as an investment, I'm looking for those, 4 to 10 based on current market that I can get, right? That are Fannie Mae, Freddie, or that are that sort of golden tickets, to borrow your terminology. And then there is like investment properties where there's no way it truly is a rental, it truly is a short-term, like a short-term rental. They're more exotic products. And as an entrepreneur and an investor for 30 years, I don't have a W-2. There's no W-2 in sight anywhere in my portfolio, and hasn't been for literally decades. So how do you manage, because you actually are, the beauty of your house is that you can do conventional, but you can manage the non-conventional applicant. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Set you up for a nice, good speech.
I love it. Yes. So there's 4 basic prongs, okay, in terms of what we have and we can offer to our clients. And within each one, there's going to be some specialty commentary. So Fannie Freddie, golden tickets, right? Highest leverage, lowest interest rate on the planet. There are 10 of these per qualified individual. I might, and so most people are fairly familiar with that. I might just offer that maximization in the Fannie Freddie. If you've got, let's say, a partnership or a husband and wife, a spouse that both can qualify, we are very specific to tell them to qualify separately. So instead of 10 golden tickets, potentially a couple could have up to 20. So that's one optimization trick. Moving on from conventional, those that want to maintain sort of that individual 30-year fixed mortgage sort of organically transition into what we call non-QM, AKA portfolio, AKA non-traditional, right? There's lots of different ways to say the same thing. And I think that's one of the reasons that the lending can be so overwhelming for people, is that the learning curve in the language, right? You can have one word that means 10 different things. So non-QM, QM stands for qualified mortgage. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac are defined as qualified mortgages. So everything outside of that is now non-QM. This doesn't just apply to investors. The non-QM product line is for anybody and everybody that just can't get the conventional financing, but again, still want that 30-year fixed, kind of more institutionally structured loan. Within it, you've got, outside of the 10, once you've exhausted your 10 here, you can go in here. There's also bank statement products. So for example, if you can't show the appropriate amount of income to qualify on a tax return, we can take a look at bank statements, averaging out 12 to 24 months of depository and P&Ls and things. There's asset depletion. So if you have a substantial amount of assets, but no real income, we can look at the asset as a means of monthly distribution for income to help qualify. And then finally, for those that really don't want to supply any financial information whatsoever, we have a debt service ratio product inside the non-QM. And I'm just going to quickly describe that. The DSR, debt service ratio product is all about the property. similar in many ways to what a commercial loan would be on a say a residential property. We're simply going to take what we believe the gross rents to be of the property, and we're going to divide that number by the proposed PITI, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. If that division gives us a 1.25%, actually, I'm sorry, correction, 1.2% or higher, the property qualifies, okay? And you can still get a 30-year fixed. Similar leverage, 70, 75%. The rates are higher. That's going to be what you're looking at here.
But they're higher by like a point, 2 points, 5 points?
Good question. So on the debt service, it layers the interest rate as it continues or as it climbs really is about the layering of documentation or income documentation. So full doc, Fannie, Freddie, lowest rates. Bank statement, then non-QM full doc, second lowest. Bank statements, higher. Asset depletion, higher. Debt service ratio, highest. So from A to, what did I get there? D or E? Let's say you're at 3.25, 3.5 here, Fannie Freddie. The highest level rate for debt service, you're probably in the high 6s, low 7s on a 30-year fixed.
Okay.
But you and I have had this conversation many a time, and I think that we agree. The interest rate, while it seems strange to some to hear this, especially if you're just getting into this, is fairly inconsequential to the transaction or the investment itself. Depends on the numbers, right? So
right. No, I think it's you understand that in a way that most do not. So I might hijack you and have you come back to that if we have time, because I understand that as an investor, but I want to hear how you understand it as a loan broker. So okay, continue. Yeah. So you're going through the tiers, the 4 tiers.
Right. So we've got conventional, we've got non-QM. We kind of went through all those. We've got short-term bridge loans, fix and flip. You call them private loans, hard money loans. Again, different names that kind of mean the same thing. This is for those that are probably looking to turn the investment quicker, right? It's not the buy and hold. It's not the passive, really. It's more of that quick fix and flip thing. I can give you details if you'd like in terms of what kind of criteria you can expect.
Do you take other people's money to do that? Do you guys actually act as a loan broker, or do you guys institutional money for that?
We do institutional. So we don't have, so we are a direct lender, which means we fund all of our own loans on our warehouse lines. There are a few products that we might broker or table fund where we can fund and then immediately resell. We don't service any of our loans, so it's important to mention that. We are going to resell, package up bundles of mortgage-backed securities and resell them on the secondary market. But the bridge loans, some are brokered, some we will fund with our money, but always we will resell.
Okay.
And then beyond that, we've got commercial loan products. Now, the commercial side can apply to commercial property, whether it be a mobile home park or a big 100-unit apartment complex. It could be a strip mall. The property type isn't as relevant, with the exception that I would tell people, a lot of people are surprised to hear, we have commercial products that actually can take residential property. They're called cross-collateralization. So you're taking multiple single family up to 4-unit properties and putting them into one blanket commercial loan. So we have those means as well. So I think pretty diverse. I know we're not going to be everything to everybody, but
honestly, that is incredibly diverse in my mind. Every time I listen to what you guys, the 4 buckets that you guys can do, because I think this is my second interview with you, but having spoken with you before and having had speak at my club and seeing you over the years, I've heard this 4 buckets conversation, but every time I hear the conversation, I'm like, how did she get enough underwriters to understand all those different products to be able to process all this stuff?
Take a long time.
Yeah, that's a lot. I mean, Fannie and Freddie are detailed enough in just the traditional buckets all by itself with the golden tickets, and then you have all the the hard money flipping loans, or I call them hard money, but the flipping loans or the short-term or bridge loans. I mean, that's a whole nother set of understanding. And I understand you don't service them, so you don't necessarily need to do the draw requests and all that, but still that's a lot to walk through in your business understanding and structure. Thank goodness you guys are a second generation so that you actually can understand the requirements of each one and stay up with that, because that really is a very diverse section for me, for somebody like an entrepreneur or somebody who is an investor. Like, that's the type of lending house I would need, which is why I've always loved what you guys stand for, that I would need to be able to bring on to, gee, I have my primary residence over here and I have a nice, good, solid rental here, but I have a short-term rental over here. And by the way, I'm doing flips over here.
Yeah.
Right. And I really am using in my investment life and in my personal life a whole variety of loan packages or loan types. You guys are one of the few companies I know that touch all those types.
Well, and that diversification from an investor's perspective, taking off my lender hat, I think is wildly important. You know, I have been, and I think we may touch on this, but I have.
Let's go there now. Go for it.
Okay. Well, I have been in my career where, as an investor, where I put too many eggs in one basket, right? So the diversification of not just property type, but market, cash flow appreciation, all the things that you mentioned, I think is that well-rounded, diverse portfolio, and that balance is really where you get the highest success rate of anybody if you're focused on real estate.
In theory, yes, it's what I often I often preach it, and then there are times when I violate my own guidelines.
That's what they're there for, right? The rules are be broken.
Yep, I violate my own guidelines, and I pay for it. Every time I can violate my own guidelines, I pay for it. I was just, I was doing an educational segment last night, and I went, you know what? Here are my guidelines. Never more than 1/3 in any particular based upon your total net worth, right? You might have 1/3 in any particular asset to 1/3 in any particular style of asset, right? Depending upon how much net worth you're trying to divide. But you like who knew that for COVID that hospitality and elderly care were going to be so hard hit in one fell swoop? And like an investment that I'm in is a group, it's a syndicated investment where they have nice diversification. They have multifamily, they have hospitality, and they have elderly care. Isn't that normally a great diversification? Right?
And
who knew COVID was going to hit and hit two of those three segments so strongly, right?
There's nothing you can do to prepare for something like that, or anything else that's going to come at us in our lifetimes. So it's an interesting conversation.
So let's get back to the investor side. So I know you've been an investor for 20 years. I know you've had a variety of homes and products that you've owned yourself. And why don't you tell us a little bit about your own investment history, but also like in relationship, like I'm going to ask you a weird question, which I don't normally ask, which is with your investment history and from the lender's perspective, because you bring both to your own investment portfolio, how has that guided you in your investment choices? Because this is an unusual perspective that you bring.
Yeah. I think that the more information, the better. And I've been lucky to have more than a one-dimensional lens or view, right? I've been able to kind of see it from so many different angles, which I think has been to my great advantage. So just to kind of paint the picture, my real estate career started, early 2000s, maybe even late 1998, 99. We really very quickly, as a lender, we pivoted and transitioned away from the owner occupied and the competition of the real estate agents and that kind of thing. And we found a home in the non-owner occupied. So obviously, in everything that we were learning, we decided, we want to be looking at real estate as a form of passive income. Well, at the time, actually, passive income is a relative term because in that particular cycle, all investments, I think we agree, are cyclical, right? I think, and in particular, real estate, very cyclical. And in that point in time, appreciation was what the play was. In fact, almost exclusively appreciation. And we did very, very well. But going to that diversification as it relates to appreciation, play, and cash flow, I made some big mistakes, real big mistakes. And the learning that we were able to
That's usually one of my questions is, what was your big learning curve? And I know you're leading right into it. So, go for it.
So it's important to also comment to everybody that not only was the cycle itself focused on really one dominant factor, appreciation, cash flow wasn't even a thing really then, okay? But the other mechanics of the time, price points were significantly higher on the single family to two to 4 unit properties back then. Interest rates were much, much higher back then. Loan products, completely different world. The leverage opportunities, 5% down. that we didn't do these ourselves, but there were lots and lots of non-owner occupied investor loans at zero down, 80-20 loans. You'll probably remember, right? 80% first, 20% second, no skin in the game. So for a lot of reasons.
And some of those were even adjustable rates on top of it.
Yes, exactly. Not only adjustable, check this out. There were neg am loans out there, which means that you're making a payment below the minimum principal and interest. So the balance that you start with, let's say $100,000 every month, is going to grow. And what they were counting on, right, for these mortgage-backed securities, and this is tranche and all kinds of stuff, I won't get into that. They were counting on the appreciation to keep going, right? So as you were adding to your principal, the value would continue to rise. So the equity build and the LTV restrictions and things would still be valid. So neg am loans at almost 100% LTV, just some very, very dangerous practices. Again, we didn't do any of that, but it was part of, you know,
it was absolutely part of the environment. My business partner took a neg am loan on on a property he resided in, his primary, quote unquote, primary residence. And there was definitely some 80-10s, 80-20s in his portfolio. And I wasn't as much in my portfolio. Maybe it's because I've been a longer term investor at that point. And so when I looked at some of those, I went, I'm not so sure. But the truth be told, I'd like to say I was super smart. And that's why I stayed out of the mess that my business partner got into. But I can't really claim anything other than just instinct and own conservatism, not necessarily because I didn't say to him, hey, dude, look, that is just so stupid. Let me explain to you why a neg am loan doesn't work. Right? I didn't, instead of saying I would love to claim that I was so brilliant, but no, I just stayed away from it out of just pure conservative.
Well, and that was enough, Christina. And then, credit to you. Anybody that I've talked to post all of that says that they heard of someone or that they themselves predicted that this was going to happen, I'm calling BS on that, right? That someone predicted that housing and lending at the same time would implode on each other and themselves. No, I think while it's true that on the lending side, people were saying, stop it, this is too much, too aggressive, etc. You had the Moody's that were rating these things. I mean, there was some nefarious activity as well, right? So
there were liar loans, straight up. I remember sitting there saying, hey, I want to buy this condo hotel. Well, how much you got? And I'm like, well, da da da. And they're like, okay, well, we're going to put this down. And I'm like,
right.
Okay. Boy, that's a new one. And, and I let them put it down. I mean, I have to confess, I let them put it down.
Yeah.
And again, the problem was never the loan. The loan, I was always able, it was not the loan. The problem was that the property that I was investing in went from $112,000 to $14,000 in value.
I got one. That's going to be my story.
Okay, good.
Okay. And mine's gnarly. Mine's really gnarly.
Okay, good. I'm looking forward to it.
Just going back. So lending, boom, right? But at the same time, simultaneously, housing, done. Nobody, and this is my opinion, I don't think anybody predicted that both of those things were going to happen on top of each other. Okay. I think some people over here were thinking this, and then some people over here might be thinking, yeah, we're looking at bubble, and then not connecting some of those. I really don't think that if anyone was paying attention to, and that's why I think it was so devastating to the country and the economy and the recovery, right? Okay. So without further ado, so lots and lots of properties, remembering that our game was appreciation. One of the markets that we were heavily invested in was Florida, and we did very well in Florida.
Okay.
Very, very well in Florida.
That's an important state.
Yeah. New construction almost always, right? We would get under contract for X. We would have a buyer lined up 6 months later to buy the property for Y. We did this several times, and the payout was substantial, 6 figures in some cases within, I mean, think about that. That's absurd.
That's absurd.
Right? So we had a property, I think we paid, and we got 6-month ARMs. Talk about ARMs, right? Because we weren't going to keep them. 6-month ARM, bing, bang, boom, gone, right? We move on, we reinvest.
Yeah, because it was because it was a development product. It wasn't necessarily a long-term hold. Yeah.
Right. So the Panhandle of Florida, we purchased a property for $1.28 million. Okay. We had our buyer lined up. So by construction, everything's done. It was called a double escrow at the time. I could be signing on my loan documents and selling at the same time.
Yeah.
Before our very eyes, we were stuck with a 6-month adjustable rate loan on, I think that our mortgage at the time was like 900. I think we had, I don't know, whatever it was. I think that our mortgage, there was a first and a second combined was about 980,000. Okay.
Which is a pretty hefty payment, because that's
about 10 grand.
That's because that's 10 grand a month if you just do round numbers, right? 500 for every 100,000 that you're lending. That's 10 grand.
We had a few of those. A few of them we were able to offload with relative, not too much bleeding, but there was one in particular. And the speed in which all of this happened was mind numbing, right? It was like a light switch, right? One day we had this, and then boom, we're in a completely different sphere of reality. So, and most of us were in disbelief, right? We're watching.
Well, and you're in the lending institution, you're in the lending field. And so if anybody was going to see it coming on the lending side only, right, you would say, yeah, I've been hearing the grumblings, but it still exists, and this demand still seems to be there. And gee, we can't see how demand would stop. And,
And if it did, right, if it slowed or if it contracted a little bit, there would still be options, right? It was unfathomable to me that there would be zero. Yeah. And there was nothing.
Yeah.
So we have all these properties. I'm in the mortgage industry, right? This is what I do for a living. We have all these properties, some of which were very high ticket items on these shorter arm loans. And we held out. This is something's gonna turn, but we're gonna have some support, blah, blah, blah. So we kept making those payments, payments. We'll be able to refinance. Something's gonna happen.
Yep. We just gotta let the industry calm itself down. It'll come back. There's no way it's gonna continue to slide for 2 years.
Exactly. And that's
never slides for 2 years. If you do your history, if you do your research, it's, if you're in the middle, I'm just sorry, you can tell I'm there with you, right?
Yeah. So, and that's about how long we held up. It's about 2 years. Those were some dark times. Excellent. As hard as those times were, looking back on it now, there was no better learning experience for me. Long story short, at the end, and so after the first year, we're thinking, okay, we got to figure something out, right? We are bleeding cash. None of these properties really cash flowed. Remember that, right? So I've got 42 properties. Values of those properties are going down. The adjustables are coming up. The rates are going up. It was an absolute bloodbath. So we started, I'm in the industry. I started contacting the servicers, modification, short sale, whatever. That took years off my life. The amount of effort and time that went into trying to get a modification done or trying to create that short sale, it was insidious beyond anything I've ever experienced. It was broken to the point that there's just no words. So I'll leave you with this. Here's the prime example. So finally we said, okay, we're going to short sale. We probably, on this particular property, forget about all the other ones, we probably offered to the bank, the servicer that had this paper, 17, 18 offers for short sale, rejected every single one of them.
Wow.
By the time all was said and done, I think that property ended up selling for almost $300,000.
Ow, that's like mine. Mine was just 1 0 less across the board. Oh my God.
Okay, I took a dark, that took a dark turn, didn't it?
Yes, no, but it's the truth of it. It's the truth of it. Yeah. That is what can happen. I mean, I really do believe that the 2007, 8, 9, that whole downturn is once every 90 years, right? The Great Recession, the Great Depression, it really is once every 90 years. But I do think that investors need to be aware, young, newer investors now want to be aware that it really does happen maybe once every 90 years. It might happen in your child's lifetime if you teach your children to be an investor. It might happen in in your lifetime, as you're an older investor, right? You might see a version of a Great Recession in your retirement years. You're 80 years old and here you are, you're seeing a Great Recession show up and you're like, what happened? It's like, well, we tried to tell you, but once every 80 to 90 years, you're going to see it because we forget.
Yeah.
We forget as a species. Our great capacity to adapt also means that we have this capacity to forget. And then we line ourselves up again thinking, oh, bad times can't happen like that. That was so long ago. How could that happen again?
Or we put things in place to avoid that. But like we said earlier, there are certain things in life that there's no way you can predict or prepare for. No. Right?
But yeah.
Nothing's foolproof.
Okay, so what did you learn as an investor, not just as a loan broker, which you probably learned a lot as a loan broker as well, but let's start with what did you learn as an investor from this bloodbath, which I experienced and you experienced and other longer term investors experienced? What was your personal lesson from that?
I think that it plays into the initial sentiment in the diversification. What I learned was the eggs in that basket, all appreciation, and what I should have had happening. And I've had many nights of ponder and thought and lots of conversation about this. And it's people have even just straight out said, was there greed? Did you get greedy with all of the money that was being made within the appreciation play of real estate at that time? And the answer is yes, 100% I did. Dollar signs all the way.
And the math worked. And every time we did the math worked.
Right.
So how are we going to get caught? Right?
How is
it going to fall on us?
Yeah, the housing market. How is the housing market going to depreciate over 100% in 6 months' time? Right.
Well, and the operative word was Florida. If you had said Las Vegas, I would have said, oh, very important statement, right? Florida and Las Vegas had an 85% downturn. They lost 85% of their value, which is, can't do the math of it correctly, but what I know is that it lost 85, went from 100 to, down by 85%. Now you literally have 15% left, which explains your 1.2 million down to 100, 200 or 300,000. Right, there's your 85% right there.
With a mortgage that was, you had a value of an asset with a value of let's say 15,000, right? But a mortgage of 100,000 that you had to pay back.
Yes.
And it took, and it wasn't every market. Some markets, like you just mentioned, got hit harder than others. But so
diversification. So your lesson was diversification and looking at your own self-greed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
I'm still a huge optimist in real estate, and I believe in it wholeheartedly as the one investment that will maintain its consistency despite what everybody saw and went through for building substantial wealth, long-term generational wealth. Yeah.
Yep.
But yeah, I just think that I would have, if I could go back and talk to that 28, 29-year-old self, I would say, we need to have our safety net here. I never want to operate in fear, right? I want to measure my risk, et cetera, but just to have that little voice in the back of my head, I think was worth maybe all of it as I clawed out and rebuilt. And I don't think you can get that evolution as a human being without getting your nose bloodied a little bit. So I don't know if that's answering the question, but
no, it answers the question. So what is it that has you even stay in the field? Like, I know my moment where I went, look, I am a big fat freaking loser. I'm seriously, that's exactly, you're sitting in the chair, you're looking at your spreadsheet, you're going, I'm really freaked up here. Something's really freaking wrong. And then you decide who you're going to be. It's not a deciding just what you're going to do. It's a deciding who you're going to be when you solve what's in front of you. And you can decide to walk away or you can decide to claw out. What was your choice?
There were many years post the crash where I was looking around thinking, what am I doing? Why am I should abandon this. I need to jump ship. Growing up, just a quick sidebar. So my father was an F-4 fighter pilot. Okay. And one of the things I remember him saying just throughout my childhood was, you never quit. Never. There is no option. You burn the ships. You never quit. You try to get smarter, not, that smarter, harder thing. But I think that, and I've always been a grinder. I'm a pretty hard worker. And I like that about myself. And I had so much, even before the crash, Christina, blood, sweat, tears. I mean, I put my time in and I burned for it. And all of that, I just couldn't come to grips with just letting it go and starting something else. I was going to relentlessly persevere under any circumstances. And I something just inside, I couldn't give up. Sometimes I thought maybe I should have, maybe I should be, but I just never did. And I'm glad I didn't. I'm glad I didn't.
You have 11 properties. You said earlier that you actually still have properties after that bloodbath and that tearing out of hair and all that, self-doubt and questioning. You actually still own properties, and you own 11 rentals?
Yep. Of the 42, 11.
Of the 42, you still have 11. Yeah. I sold everything. I don't have anything from the original batch at all. None of it. Sold it all, and did hard money lending. That's what I did. I was like, no, I don't want to see another rental unit. Although now I have rental units, right? So, not very many. I think I told you 3, right? 3 rental units. But 4, because one's a duplex if you want to count doors, but it doesn't really matter. The point is that, we find our best and worst selves in real estate investing, right? We find our greed. My husband kept yelling at me in 2007 and 8. You're a gambler. You're addicted like a gambler. And I'm like, no, I'm not. All my numbers were good, I swear. And my numbers were good. And I had some successful rental units, and some numbers were not good. Because again, I had too many. I was a gambler in that I was excited. I was a gambler in that I loved the process of trying to fix something, take it from one place to another, right? And I was just like drooling over that. I will have to reassess, was it straight up greed? Because it might be. And I love that you're bringing that to me, and I can go, I perceived it as somebody who believed in the numbers, and the numbers disappeared because I truly didn't understand how the numbers could disappear. Right?
We were good at it, right? We became experts in our field, and
I'd seen lots of numbers go by. I'd been investing already for 10 years, 15 years at that point. I'm like, I've seen rentals. I've seen this go by. I've been doing this. I know what I'm doing.
I'm smart. Smart? I'm no dummy.
No.
I figured this out.
Well, I am a dummy, and clearly I didn't figure it out, and clearly I didn't have enough hubris, and clearly I wasn't being authentic enough with what diversity the market can offer. Period. It's converted me into a much more conservative investor, with a greater faith in diversification, much like you said, and a much greater faith in watching the economy and the markets as a whole, right? That I will get sideswiped if I do not pay attention.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. I am too less risk averse, right? There's a big part of me that has some PTSD. Those were tough times, man.
Yes, PTSD is the right word. It is.
But in some ways too, I feel like some of the corrections have been made for us. Let's kind of focus. I want to just kind of go back on the financing side of all of this.
Let's do it.
Post 08-09, there was a sweeping overhaul in all things financial. From credit cards to, everything. Dodd-Frank, everybody knows that name, right?
Right.
So since then, and once things started to open up a little bit, it was always one step forward, 10 steps back, and it just was a long time coming, right? But us investors, for the most part, unless you've got your own private bank of equity partners and things like that, if you're getting any kind of institutional funding, you have been forced to really have skin in the game. This is a 180. This particular cycle and market couldn't be any different from the last. I mentioned a couple things. Price points are significantly lower. Interest rates have never been lower in our lifetimes than right now. You've got
recorded history,
right? Everything is cash flow, right? Even the appreciating markets, while cash flow is a little bit less, they're still cash flowing.
The banks are requiring them to cash flow. The banks are, to be important to cover this, the banks are requiring them to cash flow. So if you're in Southern California, like I have clients who are in Southern California, they like to buy multi-units that are anywhere from 5 to 12 units. They're Silver Lake, they're Hollywood, North Hollywood area. They do not cash flow under a traditional structure. So my clients have to put 50 to 60% down because the banks will not allow you to hold a building that has negative cash flow.
Commercial banks, absolutely.
Commercial banks. So continue. Sorry, I interrupted you if you can remember where you were.
No.
So cash flow. So the structure is different now.
So different. Primarily appreciation has kind of been, in some circles, it's a bad word. People that kind of lived through that. I think it's short-sighted to reject appreciation. I think that's still a huge part of real estate investing. But in terms of risk, they've kind of made the decisions for us. You've got to have much more skin in the game. Like we talked about, you got 20% down minimum. You got to have higher credit scores, more reserves. So the powers that be have kind of really forced that hand and made it so that we don't have such a devastating repeat of what it was. And as far as I'm concerned, in our lifetimes and hopefully many, many more to come, we won't see anything like that again in housing and real estate.
Well, and we will see. We will see. Like I said, I have my prediction, which is it'll take 80 years for people to forget, and then and then we will be something will occur. But I know that right now there are so many of us that learned our lesson in this 2008, 9 downturn period that right now, no, that isn't going to happen. So why? Let me ask you this question. Given that real estate can be truly tough, you've experienced it firsthand, and we have now heard your story firsthand about why real estate can be really tough, and it really challenges you. You have to know your numbers, you have to know your economics, you have to know your diversification, and you have to be a pretty strong and determined human being to do it long-term, which is where the greatest wealth is in the long-term game. Why stay with real estate? You've got a perfectly good W-2. You run a company. I mean, come on. Why invest in real estate at all? What is the purpose for you?
Well, we're going to keep onto this theme, the diversification. Yes, I do very well in my business. The real estate for me, I think really creates some generational legacy if you do it right. And you have some of those experiences and that measured risk. There's always going to be a fundamental need for shelter, right? Paying attention to the signs and the cues and making those informed decisions. I don't think there's a better vehicle for long-term generational wealth, passive income than real estate. It doesn't have the same volatilities as other types of investments. I won't go into that. There will be cycles. If you're informed and you're paying attention, I don't think there's a better investment. And especially today, gang, because you can leverage 80% on a 30-year fixed mortgage. Think about that, you guys. We are one of the only countries on the planet that give its citizens a 30-year fixed mortgage. And what that means, just in case it's not clear, $100,000 that is amortized over 30 years creates that smaller payment that allows the cash flow. And right now, no joke, interest rates for investment property are in the threes, the low threes. Wow. So, if you're on the fence, get off the fence. And
the fence and participate.
Yeah.
If you can. If you have a nice stable credit score, nice stable payment history, you have a down payment, now's the time to participate and play and lock in these rates. And I love the 1 to 4 right now because of this incredibly low interest rate environment we've been in. Not that I see it hijacking up all of a sudden real quickly in the middle of COVID. That isn't going to happen, or even in the recovery over COVID. You do like to play economics, and so I am going to change the subject a little bit to confirm what you said, which is, get off the fence, invest now. Is what do you think is going to happen as COVID continues to unravel itself? Will that affect the standards in the lending industry? And will it affect our opportunities as investors?
I think that we have some time. Things are going to maintain and level out the way they are now. And I really think we're going to see kind of a baseline that goes like this. It's going to be very slow moving. There's still a lot of work to be done. Some were predicting that as the vaccine becomes more prevalent, that we'll really start to see interest rates rise. I'm not so sure. I'll get into the mechanics of that in a second. I think we have a long time to keep interest rates on the low side because of the enormous amount of debt. I mean, it's just, there's no way that we're not going to see any huge spikes, not for I'd say several years anyway. As it relates to the actual funding and the underwriting, et cetera, as I mentioned a while ago, I think that investors in particular are in a really good place. We have been living underneath the extra restriction of guideline. So I don't see any big differences between what we have become accustomed to and what COVID may ultimately change. Not for us. Now, that might change a little bit for the FHAs and some owner-occupied stuff, the more marginally qualified people, because of the forbearance and joblessness and things. We might see some of that. But overall, I think that we're in a pretty good place, which is fantastic. And if I can, just going back to the rate thing, and I think you were maybe going to come back to this, Christina, so I'm just going to mention it.
Yes, that was the question. I was standing here going, wait a minute, there was this brilliant thing that she said I wanted to make sure and go back to, and I can't remember what it is. That was it. Let's do it.
Specifically, but I think you were reading my mind. So tell me if this wasn't exactly what you were alluding to.
Go for it. Interest rates, yes. Interest rates.
Now, it's important, you guys. Interest rates are important. Okay, I get that. Absolutely. But I think a lot of people are very surprised. It's a psychological thing, right? They think about an interest rate, and the lower the interest rate, they get fixated on it. And they're tripping over dollars to pick up nickels, is what I always say. And the reason I can say that is that the math is not going to lie to us. Okay, case in point, $100,000, whatever the loan amount is. Okay, let's just use a round number of $100,000. A 3.25% interest rate yields X principal and interest. A 3.5% interest rate, I think, increases the payment by $12, $13, $15, $20. So take that and so a whole percentage point up. So I think my point is that as we will see, rates aren't going down, man. They're as low as I think we're going to see them go. So we will start to see that trajectory upwards. But a full point, even 2 percentage points, dependent on the loan size, is a relatively small amount to what the bigger picture of the investment is. So I'm always trying to coach people. We want to get the best rate. Please don't misunderstand me, but it is not as consequential as a lot of people focus on. Is that where you were going with that?
That's where I was going. Yes, that's where I was going, because I've done the same math and the same calculations myself. And my clients ask me to do the same math and the same calculations. Oh my gosh, interest rates have gone down by 1/4 point or 1/2 point. Shouldn't I refinance? And I'm like, no. No, you shouldn't refinance. You want to at least have a whole point, at least a whole point, right? At least between a 3 to a 4 or a 4 to a 5, you want to have at least a whole point, because of the cost of just refinancing. You're going to have a point or two just in the cost to refinance. So a client just sent me a schedule, and he's like, oh man, I could refinance now. It's a point difference. I'm like, okay, great. And he sent me a whole schedule, and he says, okay, so given how much I have to pay up front to get this maximum amount of 1.5 down, it was $15,000 up front. He's like, it would take me 60 months in order to recoup the cost of my down payment, or the refinancing fee, the refinancing cost. It would take me 60 months in decreased payments to recoup that cost. And I said, well, are you going to own the property that long? And when are you going to sell it a year or 2 or 3 later? Because you got to make sure you own it 5 years.
Or you just threw money away.
Otherwise, you just threw money away.
Yeah.
Right. So, and when you're in the investment business, properties, sometimes they stay 30 years. Sometimes they stay 3 years, right? Sometimes they're in appreciation play and they're going to stay 8 years. And when you're talking about the difference of 3 years or 8 years versus it's my primary residence for my parents or our last home for forever home, which is we're truly going to pay the note for 30 years. Because people on average refinance every 5 years. They either sell or refinance in 5 years. So the burden of the difference is one, so small, and two, small across, the effect is actually smaller across time than what people expect because they're going to be rotating the property on the investment front. So I don't actually know the numbers of people that keep 30-year loans for 30 years. What percentage of 30-year loans that are made do people actually pay in the 30 years? What's the percentage?
Okay. So that you are so spot on, Christy. That's exactly what I tell my clients.
Cool. Okay, cool. Yeah, I got this right.
So spot on. I can't tell you how many emails we have been receiving about refinance, and we'll show them the numbers on those smaller loan sizes. Even a point or a point and a half does not justify the cost. Right. It just doesn't. So you got the math perfect. So for those listening, this is what you want to do. Look at the total cost. Let's say it's $4,000 against the new savings, the payment. Maybe it's $30, $100, whatever it is. General rule of thumb. After I've asked, how long are you going to keep this property? That's the first thing that you need to know. How long are you going to keep this property? Is it a buy and hold? Mm-hmm. But typically speaking, I want to see that recapture, savings versus cost. Now, it's not out-of-pocket cost. It's rolled into the loan. But regardless, I say 5 years or less. Okay. I just wanted to typically, right, depending on the other question, how long are you going to keep the house? So just to dovetail on that, check this out. These are some fun statistics. And this is currently... let's start with the average turn time for refinance. And this is for primary residence. And we have to assume that for investment, it's probably even less. But right now for primary, 7.3 years is the average, right, of shelf life for the 30-year fixed mortgage. The percentage of people that start with a 30-year fixed mortgage and end up 360 months later paying it off is less than 1%.
I didn't know it was less than 1%. I knew it was small. I thought it might be like 10, 15, 20%. I didn't know it was less than 1%.
Less than 1%.
So therefore, it's even more important for people to understand the conversation about the interest rate is important, but is really not important until it has a big enough percentage differential, whether that's a point and a half, or 2 points, and over the length of time. Because if you calculate the difference over 30 years, that's accurate and that's true, but such a small percentage of even primary residences are kept for 30 years.
Can I add something? Because this often kind of parlays into, well, I'll just get a 15-year or a 10-year fixed. I am a vicious proponent against the shorter term amortization. This kind of goes into that education that we were talking about. All that's really going to do is it's going to increase your debt to income ratio. The truth of the matter is, if you know the math, and remember, the math is the math, man, it's not going to lie. Just compare a 30-year to a 15-year, okay? Lower interest rate on the 15, of course, shorter, half the amortization, so the payment will be higher. Take the principal and interest payment between those two scenarios, okay? Subtract the numbers. Let's say it's $300 a month. Take the 300, send it in with your 30-year fixed payment, and an amortization table will show you you'll cross the finish line in 15.4 years. So you end up paying 4 extra months of interest. Okay. You don't pay the extra interest on the higher 30-year fixed because you've accelerated the payoff so fast. But really what you've done, you guys, is you have maintained that debt to income ratio. Your liability, as it looks from an underwriter's perspective, is going to be lower, even though you're going to pay it off at your discretion.
Your discretion.
There's no reason to take the 15-year or the 10-year. Zero. In my mind, that's just my 2 cents.
No, I think what you described is it's easier to get the 30-year. It allows you to qualify, right? Because the payment ultimately is going to be lower and your debt to income ratio, right, is affected. But if you want to do a 15-year, then send in the extra money. To do the 15-year, you can treat it like a 15-year, which is fine and great. And if that's what you want, then go for it. But then you don't have the headache and the difficulty of getting the loan itself, period. You can get a 30-year. You can get into a loan product that might actually be more advantageous for you instead of squeezing yourself into a 15-year.
Yeah.
I think I'm trying to describe that well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And unless you've got massive amounts of disposable income and a debt to income ratio of 1, fine, take a 15-year. Otherwise, there's just no reason for it. You'll never pay the extra interest. You've paid it off so quickly. You got to be disciplined, of course, every month to send that extra, right? But
right.
Otherwise.
Yeah, and my suggestion has always been, well, what about those few times when where you start to struggle? The 15-year is hard. Your kid is in college and you have 4 years of college payments, or even in your primary residence, right? Or, your mom ends up needing medical help or assistance, or there might be those few years where you really could use a slightly lower payment, and you don't want your primary residence to be at risk because you're forced to make a 15-year payment.
Yeah, your feet aren't held to the fire.
Your feet aren't held to the fire. You can make more choices. Versus, don't use a NAGAM loan. Let's make that really clear.
Yeah,
let's not do that one, because that was what the sales point was for the NAGAM loan was. Yeah, you can make the NAGAM payment, or you can make the full payment. It's up to you. And so let's not have that conversation. We're not encouraging NAGAM loans, as we would. If you're only listening to the second half of this, guys, listen to the beginning where we talked about there's truly difficulties with the NAGAM loan in that lending environment. So, Caeli, I would like to thank you for your time, for your authenticity as well, and for your knowledge and for your wisdom. I really appreciate it. And thank you for being so transparent on this show.
Thank you, Christina. My pleasure. I love our time together. This was truly a treat for me. Thank you for having me.
So if people want to get a hold of you and they want to use Ridge Lending, right, which is nice, easy, because it's RIDGE, Ridge, right, all straightforward. Easy. How do they get a hold of you, either as a lender or as somebody who can talk about her investment experience personally, and maybe a trusted source for an investor being able to go, I need help?
Yeah, a coach or mentor, that's someone.
Coach or a mentor, absolutely. Or just somebody who needs a lending house that can work with what they've got.
Very easily, just a few simple ways. You can go to our website, ridgelendinggroup.com. You can call us toll free, 855-747-4343. The easy way to remember, 855-74-RIDGE. Otherwise, info@ridgelendinggroup.com. I'm kind of a control freak. I'm on all email distributions of the company, so I see everything. Any one of those ways, you'll get to us.
Beautiful. All right. And I know you have quite an extensive staff of underwriters and people who are very knowledgeable. And so they can start with you, but I'm sure you will be able to help them with their needs, ranging across all 4 buckets at different stages in their life and for different loan products. So that's the beauty of Ridge Lending Group. So thank you, Caeli. I so appreciate it. You take care. This is Christina Suter with Real Estate Breakthrough. Thank you so much for listening to my podcast. Tune in every week for a new guest. And don't forget our educational units, our educational segments, and our quick tips. And you can find me on ChristinaSuter.com or on Roku, iHeartRadio, iTunes, Spotify, and a whole list of other places I can't even remember. Thank you so very much.